Okay, now we can officially start after that awkward intro. Welcome everybody to the Open Water, basically how to start freelancing and consulting panel. We have assembled two people here today who are really amazing and have been running their own businesses for a long time. We're going to talk about what it takes to start your own freelancing business or consulting business, some tips and tricks. But so let's just dive into it. Let me introduce my panel here real quick. We've got Patricia Bravo. She is the founder and empathetic leader at Bravo for You, which is just celebrated 10 years of being a business. Congratulations, Patricia.
Thank you.
And then we have Tom Genoni. Tom, does your business have a name? You're just Genoni.
Just Genoni Studio.
Just Genoni Studio. Like, very yes. Creative. I like it. That's saying what it is. And I've known Tom for years, but you are a developer, front-end developer, designer. I know you have a lot of things, but if you give us just a quick, like, what is it that you do, your services?
Yeah, I'm a designer and developer. I work with startups, mostly smaller startups, to build out what are called design systems and the tools for the designers and developers to use to scale their applications faster.
Excellent. And Patricia, tell us a little about the services that Bravo for You offers.
Yeah, I work with leaders to activate empathy as a strategy for leadership success. And I do that in ways that are, I think, a little bit unconventional from what a lot of people think of when they think about empathy and leadership, which is really around helping leaders save time and enhance their decision making.
Excellent. So you both, Patricia, you've been doing this for 10 years. Tom, you've been sort of doing this off and on for, like, would you say decades or?
Well, yeah, I've been doing the work for as full-time work for a long time, but about 2000, the beginning of the pandemic, started doing freelance and then focused on Genoni Studio for the last 4 years.
Excellent. All right. So Patricia, I'm going to start with you. How does someone know that they are ready to transition into working for themselves? There are probably a lot of people in the audience who are thinking like, "Ooh, I've always wanted to go freelance," but what sort of gauge do you think people should ask themselves to figure out, oh, they're ready to make that move?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it. And I would say it falls into two buckets, personally and professionally. So I always invite people to think about personally, is this something that they're ready for? And whatever your personal circumstances are, your support system, the people that are around you that you might lean on during, a startup environment that you would put yourself in. So I really invite people to think about personally. Do you have a family? Are you on your own? Are the people that are, in your immediate circle going to be supportive, or are you going to need to find yourself a new community? So I really ask people to think about that from a readiness perspective. Professionally, well, I'll add one more thing personally. Personally, I think you also need to think about what your risk tolerance is. And I think that's really, really important early on to think about, are you somebody who's comfortable with risk? And I wasn't terribly comfortable with risk when I started my business. So I always like to tell people that you don't have to be that adventurer that wants to dive off of a cliff. Of course you can be, but it's not required to be an entrepreneur. So, but knowing what your risk tolerance is going in will help you make some better decisions about how you decide to invest and grow in your business. Professionally, I invite people to think about, are you going into business, into freelancing, into consulting? Are you interested in being a solopreneur on your own? Are you interested in building a business? What is kind of driving? What is your motivation professionally? Some people these days just want a side hustle. Others might be thinking about doing this full time. So what's motivating you? Are you thinking that this is temporary and short term? Are you experimenting? Or are you really thinking about going all in? And what are all the implications associated with that? Obviously, most importantly is, are you financially prepared to take on an endeavor like this? And what is your financial situation professionally that you need to think about? For some people, it's a significant concern. For others, they've had funding from other endeavors, and so have an opportunity to maybe take a little bit of a wider risk. So those are some things that come to mind for me. Tom, I see you nodding.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's funny because I wrote a post sort of describing a bit of my journey and my sort of general advice to freelancers. And the first sentence is, I am risk averse. It took me a long time. I think for me, the idea of being your own boss, of course, is everybody would want that. But it took me a long time to sort of understand that I was risk averse. I had a very conservative view of work, that you have a full-time job, you have, steady income, steady health insurance, all the things that comes with a regular job. And so it took me kind of understanding that and acknowledging that about myself to realize, oh, wait, maybe I need to, acknowledge that, but see if I can take a risk and understand that I have a lot of the support systems that you were just describing. So yeah, it took me a little bit of time to work to commit to working independently, and so I think that's something for people to keep in mind as they're working through it, because there are a lot of those friction points that you have to work through.
And people, we have posted, Tom let us repost that risk averse article. It's a really good, it's like how to start freelance tech. You can find it in the thought leadership section on Open Water. And I highly recommend everyone take a look at it. But Tom, as you were sort of going through this, you're risk averse, right? And all the things in traditional work, but how did you go about determining what services you wanted to offer, right? Like you are a designer and a developer. So how did you come together figuring out a package that would fit in the marketplace, or something that you knew you could do?
Yeah, so that's tricky. It obviously depends on the kind of work that you're going to be doing as a freelancer. Some of it is, if you're a career coach, that might be an easier sell. You know exactly what you want to offer, and you know what your clients are expecting. I work in tech, so tech has a wide swath of things that go into building products. So it's sort of figuring out a little bit for yourself, what it is that you want to do. How much do you think you can take on? How much do you think what kind of services do you think people will need? So for me, I started out mostly just providing some developer support. Having done design in the past, as I was talking to these companies, sort of realized, hey, they need sort of both sides of the equation, especially the younger startups that don't have a lot of resources. And so eventually realizing that, my experience in design systems, where I had been working for many years, was something that companies could use early on. And so it takes a little bit of, prodding and understanding, talking with clients to try to determine what it is that will, make the most sense. I think the other thing is to consider is, and particularly in tech, how broad do you want your offerings to be? And does that mean you're going to take on things that you aren't necessarily interested in? And maybe you have to do that early on to establish yourself. And then over time, you can focus down on the things that you really want to do as you build your reputation. So it's really, again, depending on the kind of work that you want to do, sort of feeling out the marketplace and deciding what a good offering would be.
Yeah, Patricia, can you talk a little bit about that? What came first for you? Sort of the niche that you knew you were going out with, or the niche sort of came over time?
The niche came over time. Yeah. So I really like, Tom, what you're talking about, because it was similar for me. I started out just really broad in leadership development, because you don't know when you're starting out who's going to hire you, what are people really interested in. And so I did a lot of what I was known for, which is team development, the human side of change management, a lot of things that fell under the umbrella of leadership development, creating toolkits. But I learned in my first year that what I really wanted to narrow in on was empathetic leadership, but nobody knew me for that. And 10 years ago, people weren't talking about empathy the way they're talking about it today. So it was definitely an evolution for me. And my niche came many years later. I mean, it's been probably 7 years later that I really was able to focus on my niche.
Oh, wow. I mean, considering you've been in business, I mean, so that took up a lot of chunk in terms of the overall lifespan of your business up to this point,
Yeah.
right? Just kind of figuring out where your market fit was. That's really interesting. Patricia, I want to stay with you for a second. And if someone is ready to make that plunge, they're ready to start off on their own consulting or freelancing, what do you think the first thing they should do is?
The first thing, such a big question. I think it's really about experimenting with some sort of a client, so you can see the experience from end to end, and then you can begin to identify, those personal and professional things that you've thought about. How is this experiment with a client working. And an experiment with a client can be very much something like a trade with someone, right? If you don't yet have clients and you're really starting from scratch, maybe you do a trade, meaning you find somebody who has an interest in your skills, and you might have an interest in something that they're offering, and you could set up some sort of an arrangement for a trade. You could look for a referral client, and work initially with somebody who has a project, sometimes with a smaller scope, is really easy to kind of dip your toe in the water and begin to experiment. I've had people, take on volunteer jobs that I know. I was really fortunate. I got referred to a friend of a friend who was trying to grow their business, and they were my very first client. So because it was a friend of a friend, it felt a little bit lower stakes than going into a Fortune 500 company like I do now. But it gave me the experience to really recognize, I don't really have a good, proposal process, right? I was just needing to, put some of those things together and recognizing the building blocks, and, oh, here are the things that I'm really strong at. And oh boy, here are the things that I really need to learn. And so you get some of those insights by experimenting through a project. And so I always tell people to focus on experimenting with a project, and don't get too caught up in the building blocks of the business, which I think many of us, myself included, have gotten heavily involved in, because it's the experiences with the clients that will really inform where to head next.
That's interesting. All right. So I want to make sure our audience knows that we'll save time for Q&A. You can just smash that Q&A button at the bottom and submit a question, and I'll ask it. But Tom, I actually do want to get into this, right? So I know that you formed a company like last year or a couple of years ago, whatever it was. But so I imagine you've done both as just sort of like an independent, self-employed entity. But now you're moving, especially for like tax purposes, you've set up your own S Corp. Can you talk a little bit about the differences? Because I think that's important for people to think about as not only they start, but then as they, if it's something that they're going to continue doing, how to set themselves up for the long term.
Yeah, and I just wanted to piggyback on what Patricia was saying, just about getting started, dipping your toes in the water. One of the things that you learn quickly when you start to do this is for me, I like doing the work, designing and doing development work, but you have to become a salesperson. You have to become an accountant. When you're running your own business, there's all these extra things that you have to do. And so jumping right into the deep end, it can be kind of a shock. The water's a little cold. You're going to have to, ease your way into it. And so, just to reiterate what she was saying about doing it sort of in a gentle approach. But once you do get started, and once things are going, hopefully things are going well, depending on what you are making, first of all, an LLC is, I'm not giving legal advice here, but
just so you know, this is consult your own legal and financial experts before proceeding.
An LLC is a common way to start, because you can sort of provides protection. I don't know that I'm going to get sued because my design didn't work, but you sort of create this separate entity, but that entity alone doesn't provide any tax advantage. So if you're just, if you're making, say, $100,000 in your business, you're going to be paying regular personal income tax on that. And so what is a way sort of to deal with that, and to get a break on your taxes, is to file your taxes as an S Corp. Now, I did not do this myself. There are, you will very likely need an accountant to help set that up. I worked with a company called Collective. They're kind of a startup, a big team of accountants, and they focus specifically on individual entrepreneurs who want to open their business with a single employee, that is themselves. And they handle all the logistics of that. And so there's filings for the IRS. There's, you pay yourself an amount, and that's, your employee. And so it gets very complicated. And it's not something you necessarily need to learn every detail, as long as the accountant is taking care of that for you. But the long and short of it is, I believe their threshold for clients that they take is $60,000. So, they charge something like $3,000 a year. But if you're making $6,000, you'll be actually saving money by going that route, despite having paid them that amount. So the more you make, the more you're going to be saving year to year on taxes. That's not something you would pursue right away. But if you're successful and things are going well, and you anticipate an income higher than that every year from your business, and that's a good route to look into.
While we're on the subject of money, we got a question from the audience here that I'll just ask because it's a natural segue. Patricia, this person wants to know, what's your advice for charging clients, by the hour or by the project?
Ooh, I love this question. This is a question that I hear so frequently. I am a big proponent of charging by the project, and here's why. I read a book really early on. I'm somebody who learns through books, so one piece of advice I always give people is to think about how you like to learn. Are you somebody who likes to learn through YouTube videos or through people? Or I happen to be somebody who likes to learn through books. So I read a book called Value-Based Fees by a gentleman named Alan Weiss, who really persuaded me to think much more holistically about the value that I bring and to create my pricing based on projects. And so that's what I did fairly early on. Now, the clients sometimes need to understand what that looks like. So you have to get really good at the art and science of talking about the value and what you're bringing into the organization, particularly when you're doing things like I am. That can sometimes feel squishier to clients. So you really have to be able to articulate your value really, really clearly. But trading time for dollars is going to be less effective for everyone in the long run. And so I think the project and setting yourself up to price yourself for a project in a way that you are going to be fully satisfied no matter what you need to give to the client in order for them to achieve their goals is really where the value comes in. And often what happens with the clients is that you're bringing a lot more value than they recognize on the front end. For me, I find a lot of clients come in and they ask me to do X and Y, and then I bring X, Y, and Z, and they realize that they needed that, and that's what they're getting from the engagement. So definitely I lean heavily on the project side.
Tom, you have a very concrete, so you have a definable set of skills. I can code in this, I can design this, right? Like I know these applications, which probably have some sort of market value that you can translate into. And one thing I'm curious about, I want to let you answer the question real quick, but I feel like as a freelancer, for me, sometimes I get wrapped up in like, oh, they're never going to pay me that much. I shouldn't ask for that much. I should just be grateful. And I imagine that's sort of, you know what I mean? Like that can be a hard thing to overcome. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that as you set up your own fee structure.
Yeah. So around the question of project versus hourly, so the tech world has different variables involved, and so often what I would do is I do lean toward the project. If I am able to scope the problem, usually with a design system, I'm able to say, you'll get 20 components and these kind of things, and I'm able to package it up in a way that I can provide it as a project. The benefit there is the client knows how much it's going to cost. They're not going to get a bill all of a sudden for you work 20 hours and then they have this unexpected bill. And so it can be very clear. And I think the other part of it, the value is that sort of concept. It's a difficult thing to turn into a dollar sign, but that's an important point, because it's not just I can do X for this amount of money. What is the value I'm bringing to that company? What am I saying? I personally in design systems, I'm saving them paying a designer, a developer, and also by doing it correct the first time, there's a lot of work that they would have to make mistakes along the way and redo. So I try to think about all those things and articulate that to the client when I'm talking to them. What has worked really well for me is working with a client on a scope project, and often what they'll have is ongoing work afterward, which I will charge hourly. It's just sort of the nature of tech work. Is they're building something out. I built them, something, the initial project, and now they have, the needs for ongoing component work and other things. So that's worked out really well. And then I sort of become almost a pseudo employee, but I can set my own hours, and it's worked out pretty well that way. So that's something to consider depending on the kind of work that you're doing. Get in the door with a scope project, and then if things go well, potentially this can turn into ongoing work. Sorry, what was your what was your follow-up
No,
question?
it's well, I think that this we got another
Oh,
question from the audience that I think
yeah,
kind of wraps into it, right? Which is, how do you know how to gauge pricing for something? Are there,
yeah,
when you set prices, are you looking at what other people have set? And this is a question for both of you, right? Like, are you just looking at what are, I mean, obviously you got to think about market rates, right? But, and I don't know if there are resources where you can find that. And obviously you need to think about, well, what do I need to exist and live as my own
yeah.
business? But sort of as you are setting that prices, what other things are you sort of taking into account?
Yeah, I'll just continue since we were talking about that. Is most of the things you've articulated there are go into that equation. You know, the first level is, well, what do I need to survive? So if you can't make that, then this is not going to work for you. Um, Determining market rate. So in tech, it's wildly different. So if I'm in San Francisco, it's one rate, and if I'm in Europe, people are paid considerably less. So understanding what your not only what the kind of work you do and get paid for, but what region you're in. I mean, one of the best ways to do that for me, at least, was to try to reach out to other freelancers through my network and just sort of talk to people about it. I think one thing I found is that a lot of freelancers, they all know they're in their own little boats and everyone wants to help each other. There aren't that many communities to provide that yet, but hopefully, maybe this will be the beginning of something like that. To really just determine kind of what the kind of going rates are for that work, and also your skill level. So that's obviously a big factor. Someone who says they can code a website after their first year out of computer science degree versus somebody who's been doing it for 10 years, there's just going to be a big difference there. So it's just unfortunately no easy calculation to determining what your pricing is going to be, but I think that's taking into all those, the more data points you can get, the more confident you can be when you are presenting it to the client.
Patricia, any thoughts on that? Like, how did you, as you're putting together projects?
Yeah, Tom, I love what you're saying about get as many data points as possible. I have strived to do that as well. I had a business coach that once taught me to first start with your squeak by number, which is what you need to like really be comfortable to squeak by. And so that term stayed with me. So I always try and pass that along. Because they're surviving, but a lot of people particularly people that are exiting corporate environments, they have some sort of stability, but you do need to identify like what is it that you're comfortable with squeaking by, and it's different for all of us. Once you have that can help inform obviously what you need to bring in on a monthly or annual basis. But then for me, the pricing also comes through getting a number of data points, as many as I can. I get them sometimes when I'm fortunate enough. I do a lot of work through referral. So when I know somebody inside a company that is evaluating me along with other, vendors or professionals or consultants, if I know them, sometimes they'll give me a little bit of insight that tell me why I got the project or why I didn't get the project. That helps a lot. So having relationships has really paid off for me in terms of getting that intelligence that maybe you normally wouldn't have access to. I also put together a mastermind group. So Tom, to your point about kind of the community and talking to other freelancers or consultants, in the work that I do, it kind of falls under this umbrella of leadership development, and it is a range of professionals that do this type of work. And so how do you figure out where you fit in? Sure, you might be new, but that shouldn't mean necessarily that you want to charge really low because you're new. So that's a trap that many of us fall into. I fell into, and then it takes a while to catch up. So you want to really make sure that you have a handle on the market data. So in my mastermind group, we are a team of 5 women that have adjacent businesses. And so the data points that we collectively get really help us benchmark and identify if we're appropriate in the marketplace. And then, obviously, you'll know also based on the projects that you're landing and the ones that you're not getting. And I heard somebody say once, I can't remember who said this, that you should be getting declined for about 25% of your projects, because that's going to tell you, that's going to give you some insight around, oh, okay, maybe I'm too high for this, but then you'll get kind of the sweet spot of the 50%, and then, the 25% that are a slam dunk.
That's, I think that's a good rule of thumb. I want to remind the audience that they can ask questions at any time. Just submit a question using the Q&A button below. All right, Patricia, let's talk about the sort of the big question people have, which is like, and you kind of referred to this just a little bit ago, which is finding clients. And how do you find clients? How do you find your first clients, and how do you find your ongoing clients? What kinds of thoughts and advice do you have around that for people?
Yeah, for me, I've been really fortunate to build my business based on referrals. I worked in a lot of companies. I've built a lot of relationships before I launched into the entrepreneurial world. And I realized then stepping into this world that that was going to be a great source for people who already knew my work to refer me to others. And so that's how I built my business. The benefit of that is that you get warm introductions and people, know the quality of your work and the types of things that you do. And the downside is that eventually you hit a saturation point. So a couple of years ago, I realized that I was hitting a saturation point. And so then I had to start to get creative about how I'm actually marketing and presenting myself to new avenues and new opportunities. So you do have to, as you progress in your business, think about, are you trying, to what degree are you trying to grow? I read a book called Small Giants really, really early on, and it really spoke to me because I wanted a business that was going to grow thoughtfully and be sustainable. I didn't know I would get to 10 years, but I definitely wanted to be around for a while. And so that helped me think about how I wanted to grow, and a referral business worked really well for me for that. But a few years ago, I decided that I wanted to, scale further. And so that changed the way in which I need to learn about and think about getting in front of other people. And so for me, that meant that I needed to get more present in social media. I needed to ask people directly if they would consider referring me to others versus waiting for people to think about me. And so it's been really interesting to just kind of see the shift. And then, of course, client referrals. I think client referrals also, because I've been introduced to new clients, and then those clients introduce me to other prospective clients. And so I think it's an engine that you kind of have to build over time if you use that approach. And it's not for everybody, but it's one that's worked for me.
Tom, what
Yeah.
what are your suggestions for finding work?
Yeah, I think that's, in tech, it's very, very much a referral, fueled kind of business. So I have the same experience. When I first started, I had just a lot of referrals based on I had a network that I built up. I hadn't intentionally built it up for this purpose, but as it turned out, I, had a lot of people that I work with who I was able to contact and let them know I was doing this work. And so the first couple of years, I got a lot of referrals, and some, more than I could take on. And then that well is sort of starting to dry up, and so now I'm having to go out on and pursue pursue sort of either cold contacts or reaching out to companies that are looking specifically for contractors. Another thing to do, in tech is, especially with young startups, if they're looking for work, even if they're full-time jobs, I might try to reach out to them and just explain, hey, listen, I do this kind of work. This might be appropriate based on the kind of things you're interested in. Tech companies, they pivot constantly. Their needs change daily. So that's another option. But I think in the tech world, there aren't as many, they're not going to be looking up on the web, for a design systems engineer. They're going to be wanting to find out somebody that they, worked with, and, referral back and forth. One thing I'll add, though, is that there are starting this sort of trend of kind of, I guess I'll call them agencies, where you can join a company. One's called A.Team, one's called Huddle.works. You get vetted, but once you're in, that sort of group goes out and gets contracts from different companies, from larger contract, and then from within that team, within that group, they create teams. So it's I have not used either of them yet, but it's another possible avenue for a freelancer who doesn't necessarily have a big network, but has good experience, and can join something like this and potentially get on a team and get some experience as they're starting to build up their own network.
We got another question here, which is, how important is it to have a website or testimonials to promote yourself? There are actually a few questions in here, and then they go on to ask, what happens if most of your work is under NDA? So first off, I think we could probably agree you need your own website, right?
I definitely do.
Patricia?
I would say yes and to that one.
Yeah.
Yes, and don't get too caught up in building the website that you're not focused on experimenting with clients, because I think that's a trap that many of us fall into. Particularly if you're not somebody, which I wasn't, an expert on websites. That was a big learning curve for me. And so, at different times I invested probably more time than I should have, when I should have been working on building client relationships or referrals. So yes, but one page might be enough. One of my earliest clients didn't actually have a website. They were doing such great work that it wasn't even necessary. So that really left an impression on me.
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, it's the expectation is that I have a website because I'm selling them, or selling that work. But and I do collect endorsements from previous clients, and I have that on a website. To be honest, I don't know how much impact that actually makes. I think the referral from a trusted colleague, friend, coworker that I'm reasonably good at what I do is going to mean way more than them being impressed by my website. So it's almost like it's kind of a business card. It's sort of, for me, it's important to have, but I don't know that it does the heavy lifting of convincing a client that I'm good at what I do.
Yeah,
I want to ask this. I'm sorry, go ahead, Patricia.
I was just going to add that it's almost like a validation of your credibility.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily convert a client.
Well, because what I wonder is if it's just table stakes, right, to have your own URL, right? So even if Patricia, like you said, you just have you go to Squarespace and you build one page that's just like, I do this, and it's just text, but just having that, because I know that when I see people who have like a Gmail account or Hotmail or Yahoo or something, it kind of makes me pause and go like, is this not serious enough for you that you couldn't or wouldn't get your URL, even if it's, I realize that URLs are sort of difficult to get, but I would assume, I don't know if you both are sort of in line with that thinking. It seems like it's just sort of table stakes anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for tech, obviously, I think that's going to be important, unless you've established your reputation in other ways. I mean, there are designers and developers who will never have any trouble finding jobs. They're just sort of stars essentially, and their website might be really minimal. So in tech, it's one thing. I don't know that that's true though for things that aren't specific to tech.
I mean, how long did you launch with bravo4u.com, Patricia?
I did, but I'm on website 4.0 right now. In 10 years, this is my fourth one. So, but my first one was just a page. I mean, it was really a page. It said a little bit about who I am and what I do, and it was enough. I didn't love it, but it was enough.
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of that too is also the email address, right? When you get something from someone, even if there's no page connected with it, you're like, oh, they're putting thought into it, resources. And then I'll ask this, like, if you both do work under NDA, is that just like, oh, I guess, whatever the terms of the NDA are, but like how, this question from the audience is, what happens to your work if it's under NDA? Patricia, I'll start with you.
What happens to your work? Meaning,
well, like you're not able to really go out there and tout it, right? So it's just like, you just have to do a good job for a good job's sake.
yes.
But do you ever go back and say, hey, has this NDA, I'm interested, what can I say? Like, do you have an approach in terms of that?
I think in the work that I do, because so at this point now I have kind of two lanes that I'm in. I'm on the B2B side is generally Fortune 500 companies. On the B2B side, it's leaders individually, and that side's new. But so I'll speak to the B2B side because that's where I've spent a lot of my time. The NDAs are really, really clear. Companies are very clear about what they want you to say and not say. And so I just talk in generalities to people. I was working, at a large tech company, working with a large Fortune 500 tech company. And, these are some of the things that they experience. And here are some of the things that I brought to them. But if there is a prospective client or project where having some sort of a testimonial would be valuable, I would go back and ask the client, but it would be very specific to an upcoming project, because they probably want to know that, it's not a competitor and, those types of things. But I would say, can I mention a little bit more about this project? And I would go directly to the person that hired me for that project to see if they would be comfortable doing that. I haven't had to do that, because most of the time, people are just interested in hearing about the details of the project. And sometimes you can share enough high level that they know you've done that type of work. I imagine, I'm looking at my crystal ball here, that this person is asking is because, especially when you're early and you're new, you don't have enough of those testimonials. And so then it's like, oh my gosh, I really want to share because this project was really successful. And so in those cases, it might be worth it to go back and ask the person if they're, and share a little bit about how you might communicate, so they see that, you're not unveiling anything that is proprietary or confidential, but really trying to just showcase the success and the impact that you had. And again, I think that's part of where it goes back to the value-based pricing, is to think about the value that you brought, more so than the components that might be sensitive or confidential to the company.
That actually, Tom brings up a question for me, which is, I imagine you have lots of clients and some of them might be competitors. How do you, so do you have sort of rules or things that you follow as you sort of encounter those situations?
I haven't had I have worked in that kind of situation, but it's rare that anything is so proprietary that I have some secret knowledge about what they did. I mean, the nature of my work is I'm sort of just laying, I have a layer on top of what they're already doing, and so it's rare that I would have some, inside, baseball knowledge of one company and need to kind of silo that knowledge for another company. I imagine that can happen, but it just, the nature of my work, I just don't encounter that. And a lot of the stuff that I do is already available on the websites. The work that I do is very public, so in the areas that I work on are very public. So it's not something that is, sort of private information usually.
Got it. All right. Well, we're going to wind down here in a little bit, but I just want to remind the audience that if you have any questions, please hit the Q&A button below and submit your question and I will ask it. I want to ask both of you really quickly, what's something that you've learned from this process that you would do differently next time? Patricia, I'll start with you.
Oh, only one?
Listen, take as much time as you need. We got a hard stop at 11. So if you want, I can just keep the Zoom running.
I think for me, the number one thing that I would work on is, looking back, is getting comfortable sooner with creating in public. So one of the things that, the trap that I fell into is that I wanted to be ready. I'm somebody who wants to be 100% ready if you ask me at any given time. And in the entrepreneurial world, you can't be 100% ready because the market's going to move, things are going to change, clients are going to migrate, jobs are going to change, all sorts of things can happen. And so if you're waiting to be ready, too much time will go past. And so for me, there were times where I was waiting too long to be ready. And so sometimes you have to move at 80%. 80% in some industries are really comfortable. Like I think in tech, it's pretty common. In other industries, it's not as common. And so you bump up against that a little bit. And so you have to get comfortable with moving quicker. And so for me, part of what that meant is that I had to create in public some of the things that would be showcased that maybe weren't 100% done. And so over the last few years in particular, that's become really poignant for me because I've been adding to my portfolio this kind of B2C suite, which is services directly for leaders. So not necessarily organizations, but leaders. And not all of that has been ready when I've put it out there. And so you have to figure out what is the sweet spot between what you can produce that is not at the level of perfection that you might desire, because I imagine everybody here has high standards that is affiliated with open water. And so where do you kind of draw that line for yourself? And it takes some kind of experimentation to figure it out. So looking back for me, I think that's one that really stands out.
Tom, what's something you would do if you were to start it all over again?
Yeah, sort of blessing and a curse to have had a lot of referral work come in initially. And sort of my happy place is when I'm actually doing the work and, that's where I get the satisfaction. But as that well starts to dry up and you need to go out and get work, I think writing blog posts and maybe doing presentations and trying to get out more in public, which isn't my comfort zone, is something I will need to do if I want to get more work that comes in from people reading my work or hearing about me through those channels. And so establishing myself as a subject matter expert earlier on through those various methods, I think would have been a benefit to me to just sort of reap those rewards later on as the referral business dies down and I'm getting more incoming work from from people understanding what it is I do through those methods. So I think that's one area where I think I would have focused on. It was very easy to just I got referrals. What do I need to do? This is great. This is great. But yeah, so I think that's one thing to think about too, is just, all right, so you've got an initial work, you've got work for a year or so, what does it look like 3 years from now? Where do you want to be? How does your reputation out in public, what does it need to be for you to kind of continue to get work? So yeah, that's one area I think I would have spent a little more time thinking about.
I want to follow up real quick. Patricia, you're active on LinkedIn. Have you found that to be a good resource for you in terms of finding new business?
I would say maybe.
Definitively.
Yes, the social media platforms evolve, and so I think your business evolves, the social media platforms evolve. It's hard to keep track of all of it. I would say it's been a great resource for me for things like speaking engagements, people to learn about what I'm doing who might want like a taste of empathy and leadership. Do I get a lot of clients that are a direct translation or transition from LinkedIn? Not typically. I mean, it does happen, but it's not typical. Usually for me, it is a referral.
Gotcha. All right. Well, hey, this has been wonderful. Tom, if people wanted to learn more about your services, where would you point them?
Just Google search Genoni.studio and you'll find my website.
Genoni, Genon. You can see it right there. It's right there. Yeah. And Patricia, where can people find out more about your business?
So my website is bravoforyou.com, bravoforyu.com. And if anybody's interested, I mentioned I'm a book reader, so I get asked a lot about what the books are that I read early on. I'm happy to share them. Full disclosure, they're about a decade old now, but I think they still have some great value. If you're starting out, I'm happy to share that with you. You can just DM me through the Open Water platform.
Yeah, or if you wanted to put it up on Open Water too, I'm sure that a lot of people would find that useful as a quick post. Patricia Bravo and Tom Genoni, thank you both so much for doing this today. We really appreciate it. And good luck with your consulting and freelancing.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.